The Scream Kings are in no way responsible for any encounters with the paranormal, extraterrestrial abductions, eldritch insanity, hauntings, curses, hexes, demonic possessions, cryptozoological sightings, or any loss of sleep that may result from listening to this podcast.
This is the Scream Kings podcast. I'm Max George.
And I'm Nathaniel Darkish.
This one podcast changes everything for me. That could mean so many things.
Yeah, it really does.
It's a very cryptic opener.
If you can't pull a horror movie from that very vague quote, then we should probably mention that we are talking The House of the Devil.
Tonight's big eclipse is now well underway.
I feel a little weird just dropping you out here in the middle of wherever we are.
This is such a good movie, people. If you haven't seen this movie, go watch it. It's streamable on about everything out there. It's so good.
Yes, it is. So, I guess a few details about the movie. It is, like I said, The House of the Devil. It came out in 2009, directed by Ty West, written by Ty West, and it's just a solid movie.
It really is. And a quick kind of plot rundown. It's about this college-age student who's moving into a new apartment. She's got to find some money somewhere. She finds this advertisement on campus for babysitter. She goes and checks out the babysitting venue. It's this really creepy old man. There's a lot of details I just skipped over, but it's fine.
Yeah, that's really cutting right to the meat.
And one thing turns to another. She realizes that it's not children she's supposed to be watching over. It's this decrepit old lady. And it just snowballs from there.
Yes. And we'll, of course, cover a few more plot details as we're going over what we like about this movie. So,
Hit us
do you want to... Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll start us off. So,
I have a lot to say, but go for it.
So do I. So, I guess for starters, one of the things I really love about this movie is that it is definitely a strong tribute to a lot of 80s horror movies, and because of that, you can tell that Ty West has really done a lot to structure the plot and structure the filmography and structure really everything about the movie around that idea. So, kind of like what we mentioned with some stuff with like The Conjuring, how a lot of the techniques mirrored that of the time period. I would say this is taking that idea and running even further with it. So, for example, in the 80s, using a zoom on a camera was really a common technique, especially for getting like really close-up shots, like reaction shots that they would zoom up on somebody. Well, a more modern technique would involve moving forward with a dolly with the camera. But so this movie went with the 80s method with the zoom. And it does that with everything. Like it looks and feels authentically like an 80s movie, just to every little detail.
And honestly, the first time I watched the movie, I thought it was an 80s show. I didn't look up the year it was filmed or anything. And so, I mean, I think that's a huge testament to Ty West. I'm a huge 80s culture / movies fan, and I had absolutely no idea this was a modern film. Like, it's incredible how well produced and well shot it is to make you feel like you're watching a classic 80s horror movie.
And I also like that, for the most part, a lot of the actors and the people that he got involved in the project are also just people that aren't necessarily super huge names. I mean, I guess Greta Gerwig is pretty big now, but she was more of an unknown at that time as well. And yeah, so like you watch the movie and it's not like, oh, hey, here's this modern star and here's this modern star. They're just anonymous enough that you're like, oh, is this just this, kind of anonymous gem that kind of went under my radar for the last 30 years?
Well, and it's so flawless and seamless on how it is put together. I mean, the fashion's on point. The music is indicative of an 80s horror movie. The scenes, like you were mentioning, even how they filmed it, the cinematography is very, very true to styles that you saw, in great classic horror movies that have created a legacy. Like, it almost felt like this was a tribute to those awesome horror movies.
Oh, for sure.
And it did it so well. There are some movies out there that try and replicate this, and it just doesn't pull it off so seamlessly like this does.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this kind of styling, replicating the filmography and everything that is of, kind of the more classic era, be it the 70s or 80s, is definitely kind of a popular thing more recently. But I would say, yeah, The House of the Devil probably does it more successfully than almost anything else I've seen. It does it better than Stranger Things. It does it better than The Conjuring. It does it better than, almost any other movie I've ever seen.
And Stranger Things does a really good job, but there is something very distinct and different about The House of the Devil that I really think is that extra level of kind of nostalgia, for lack of a better term. And I don't really know what that is. You just feel like you're watching one of those horror movies that you grew up watching, and it was made 9 years ago. Like, I can't say enough good things about this movie.
All right. So what's another element of the movie that spoke to you?
For me, I love a well-balanced horror movie that keeps you engaged, definitely leads you on, but you're not 100% sure what is going on. If it is just a creepy old man with a weird grandma, if there was something more nefarious going on, is this going to turn into a ghost movie? The title is called House of the Devil, so is there demon stuff going on? And you really have no idea the full content of the plot until like the last 15 minutes. And sometimes I really don't like that, but this movie ties it up all very, very, very well. You've come to find out that there's this lunar eclipse that's happening, and so this family who advertised the babysitter is actually looking for a victim to use in a human sacrifice. And the family is all engaged in these very, very dark black magic, satanic ritual stuff, and it like snowballs out of control, but in the good, powerful way. Would you agree?
Yes, for sure. I feel like it's such an effective movie because it's just so well constructed in terms of the plot. So we have this character who is there because she is desperate for money. But she's smart. She is willing to get out of there if there's anything too fishy.
And it's so good. I just want to interrupt you there because she is smart. And that's really brilliant to see, especially in an 80s horror movie. She brings her best friend along to scope out the place and make sure it's not creepy. Like it's real life situations that would happen. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and I love that when Mr. Ullman, the man who hired her, admits to her, actually, you're not watching a child. You're really just here to make sure that if something bad happens to my mother-in-law, like that, there's someone to call the police, basically, or call an ambulance. That's basically all that we need you here for. And the fact that she's like, hey, like, you lied to me, you deceived me, like, I think I'm just gonna walk. And it's only when he very desperately and he plays it very naturally. It's like, no, like, we really just need this night out. Like, we really just need to get out of the house. I'm willing to pay whatever it takes to get you to stay here. But yeah, he doesn't play it in a creepy way. But even though there's so many red flags, it does a good job of kind of lulling you into believing stuff as well. You're like, well, maybe it is just like a nice guy. Because at that point in the movie, you don't know that he's a bad guy. You, like, for all you know, yeah, while she's, babysitting, the house will get attacked by someone unrelated to him. Like, you don't know what the context is yet. And so you don't know what you should be afraid of. And so I love that because you see her being smart and you're like, yeah, you know what? I would probably accept the job too under those circumstances.
And she's not the only one who's very smart here, you know. Mr. Ullman and his whole family, this is very well choreographed, and, you know, of course it's the acting of the movie, but the character was very real, like explaining that he just felt so embarrassed that it's not babysitting a child, it's babysitting this old grandmother, and I feel so bad, so I'm gonna, like, pay you enough for lying and pay you enough for this kind of odd, awkward situation. Like, a lot of times horror movies have stupid protagonists, but they also have stupid antagonists. And this one was just so well balanced. It was so refreshing to see. They were smart killers and smart survivors, kind of.
Yeah, and the story was constructed in a way that you as the audience didn't know exactly what was going on. And when you knew more than the main character, you still didn't have the complete picture. And it kept you guessing, and it really raised the tension in a very real way.
And by then it was too late, you know?
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite parts is when the friend actually decides to leave. And she pulls over for a smoke break, I believe. And all of a sudden, the son of Mr. Ullman, who, again, we don't know who it is at this point, pops out of nowhere and wants to give this friend a light of her cigarette. And she's creeped out, of course. She does it anyway, and then he just kills her.
Yeah, just blows her away immediately.
I thought that was brilliant, because if you put yourself into a murderous kind of... this sounds terrible of me to say, but if you were a murderer, or if I was a murderer, I wouldn't have this long dialogue. You would go for it. And I don't know, it was just really, really powerful. It came out of nowhere. It came very sudden. You're like, oh, what's going on?
Yeah, oh, and I love that scene because it immediately made everything else in the movie terrifying.
Yeah, it took it to the next level in an instant.
Yeah, because at that point, you're uncomfortable, but you don't know what the problem is. You don't know, like, you know it's a horror movie called The House of the Devil. There's a little title card at the beginnings, like, talking about, like, cults doing bad stuff, but it was kind of vague, too. And then, suddenly, this is the first real action. It's suddenly this woman just gets shot in the face. And you're like, oh no, like, her only lifeline. And like, she was really smart. She was like, okay, like, come back to me back for me at this certain time. If you haven't heard from me by this time, like, come get me. Like, they already have, like, a very safe, very smart battle plan in place, and suddenly everything goes out the window. And so suddenly everything that she's doing around the house, you know, she's just doing homework and wandering around and dancing around to her Walkman. Everything just takes this sinister air because you know something bad is about to happen, but you don't know what.
I loved those scenes. It was just so perfect 80s moment.
Yeah.
Like, it was so good. I love it.
Yeah, and then I love that, you know, she's ordering some pizza, and then the dude who shows up to deliver the pizza is the guy who shot her friend. But he just gives her the pizza and leaves, and you're like, what is going on? It's so good.
It's another thing that makes this movie really impactful, is there's this overall heavy mood throughout the entire movie. It starts out with, you know, our main actress really down. Samantha is her name.
Mm-hmm.
Really down. She's looking for money. She's trying to better her life. It feels heavy to start out with, and it holds on to that the entire movie. There's no real moment where you can take a breath. You know, even this fun 80s dance kind of nostalgia scene is underlaid with the friend just died. Like, it's just so good. It's tense. It makes you hold your breath. It's really one of the more flawless movies I think I've seen in a long time.
Agreed. Like, I love the music choices. They were very authentic to the time and the age of the character, and they're just a lot of fun to listen to, and it just made for some fun scenes.
And it doesn't, like, beat you in the face with horror. You know, the horror is very, very real. It's very kind of creepy and unsettling. And then when we get to the big, big final reveal, that's when, you know, it hits the fan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like you said, it's not until the last couple minutes of the movie that things get really bad for Samantha.
Do you want to maybe just spoiler it? Spoiler it? Wow, that's a new term that we'll have to merchandise.
Spoil it?
Yeah, do you want to spoil the lovely ending for all our listeners?
Yeah. So Samantha is starting to get really concerned. She can't get a hold of her friend, and then suddenly she's like poking around upstairs where she should not be poking around. That's where the lady that she's supposed to be watching is, and then suddenly she gets attacked.
Pause. The real horror in this entire movie is when she breaks the vase, because anyone who's ever babysitted has had that fear.
Yes.
When she's dancing, she knocks over this porcelain vase, and it's traumatizing.
Yeah.
Anyway, go back to the real reveal.
She's just kind of looking around, and then suddenly she gets jumped. She gets dragged into the attic. Suddenly she's tied up. She's, there's the couple that hired her, Mr. and Mrs. Ullman, and then there's the old lady that she's supposed to be watching, and they're and also the pizza guy, the son of the family, and they've got her tied up in the middle of a pentagram, and they're doing a ritual.
And again, like, the music changes from this kind of classic 80s style to this really Gregorian chant, horror, demon music, whatever you want to call it. The light is low, things are flashing. You see this demonic face that keeps flashing on the screen. I had to pause it like 4 different times to catch it. Mm-hmm. And you know me, I love a good demon. You have no idea what's happening. You know it's this lunar eclipse, and this weird creepy family with this really crazy grandma who's like this satanic priestess is doing this ritual. It's just so chaotic, and I love it. I love it.
Yeah, it's suddenly she is in this situation. She doesn't know what to do, but she manages to like wriggle free, after they've like made her drink blood and all sorts of weird crap. She manages to, fight back against most of the family, but then gets overpowered at the last minute, and then it cuts to her in a hospital, and it turns out she's pregnant with some sort of demon baby, is our assumption based on...
The Antichrist!
Yeah, the Antichrist or something. And then credits roll.
Yeah, and again, the movie finishes, and you're like, wait, what? 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 It's just so fun. It's a really, really solid horror movie.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of weird talking about it, because a lot of movies, if they had that kind of abrupt of a change and that abrupt of a like twist, like, oh no, like she's pregnant with the devil or whatever. Like, a lot of movies that have those kinds of twists don't work. But this movie executed that idea flawlessly.
And why do you think it worked better in this than a few of the other movies where they try and do this?
I feel like a lot of other movies, when they try to do that, they either don't give enough detail or they give way too much and just beat you over the head with it. It's either, so bare bones that you're like, this doesn't fit with the movie, or it's, hey, we're going to now sit and have, the villain's monologue for 15 minutes explaining in detail their cult and their evil plan. With this one, it was very subtle. A lot of the clues came from little snippets from them, having the radio on in the car where it's talking about the lunar eclipse and how there's lots of worries about like cult activity or, the occult, or, that the lunar eclipse is associated with occult rituals, and there's just lots of like little pieces throughout the movie that gives you enough that when it all comes together at the end, you're like, yeah, that was all there. And you can kind of, in retrospect, go, okay, that piece fit there, that piece fit there, now I have the whole picture.
And for me, I think another huge portion of it was simplistic, but scary at the same time. The grandma was very kind of grotesque to look at, and the blood pentacle and the drinking of the blood, all of that was very gory, very horror-esque, but at the end of the day, there wasn't, black eyes or cloven hooves and demon fire, it was very simple, but to the point where that simplicity scared you still.
Yeah, well, because it made it more grounded in reality.
Exactly.
Because, with the exception of the very end action, like, it's all stuff that could really happen. And then the stuff that does happen at the end, where it kind of veers into the supernatural, once again, it's done in a way that feels real. It doesn't, there's not some big crazy demonic face. There's not, there's a demonic face, but it's not like...
It's not the focus.
Yeah, it's not Valak from The Conjuring 2 or The
Which
Nun.
iteration of Valak are you talking about?
The Conjuring 2 when it turns into a full-on demon.
Not the cherub riding the snakes?
Yes.
Sorry.
It's not anything that flashy and cinematic. It felt very grounded in reality. Like, if there were really a demonic cult doing this kind of thing, this is what it would look like. It worked.
What were some of your favorite, scariest parts? I've mentioned one being where her friend dies. That to me was like the pivot point for the movie and was really very horrific in my mind. Do you have a few other ones you like?
For me, it was less any like specific moment and more just the general feeling of fear that I felt basically from that moment in the movie on. I felt uneasy for the first half of the movie, and then for the second half of the movie, I was scared because I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew whatever was going to happen would be bad. I remember recoiling as soon as I saw that the pizza guy was the dude who shot her friend. It was little thing after little thing, and just, seeing Samantha be so vulnerable and being unaware of how vulnerable she is what made me feel so scared the whole movie.
And in conjunction with that, too, I really liked how a lot of the fear for me is you just had no idea what was going on. Is this a home invasion thing? Is it satanic? Is it going to turn out to be paranormal? Is it, the call is coming from inside the house kind of a movie? What is going on? And that confusion for this movie really worked. And I think it worked because the plot was so cohesive. The characters were so real. You felt like you were there with Samantha trying to figure out what the hell is happening.
Yeah.
So for me, it's a pretty flawless movie. The only improvement or critique that I could pick out of, and this is me being very nitpicky, would be maybe some of the pacing at the beginning of the movie. It was needed, and I think it really helped develop Samantha as a character. But rewatching this movie sometimes is a little bit more difficult because it has a slower pace in the beginning, is all I'll say.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a slow burn movie, but I felt like kind of looking at it as an entire piece. I don't feel like it was a slow burn in a bad way. I felt like it had all of the little pieces, earlier on in the film that ended up being important later. So it didn't feel like it was boring or, unnecessary at any point. It set up the relationships, it set up the characters, it set up, the situation, and also set up a lot of the background details that ended up becoming important relative to this satanic cult.
And I would definitely agree. I guess all I'm saying is to be as nitpicky as possible, just because I did not give it a 10 out of our crowns. Yeah, it hampers its rewatchability, I think, a little bit. It's not substantial for me to really make a bigger deal out of it than this, because honestly, it's fairly standard, or solid, excuse me. Honestly, I think it's the best of Ty West's 4 horror movies that he's kind of known for.
Yeah.
There's this, VHS, which is pretty solid. I really like the first VHS.
Yeah, and he only did part of VHS. And
True. The Sacrament I thought was really great. I love The Sacrament, but not anywhere near as close to being as this level of good.
Oh, yeah. I really enjoy The Sacrament, but it's not on the same level.
And then he also directed The Innkeepers, which you and I have watched together, and I don't even know if you remember it because it was just atrocious.
Yeah, I need to rewatch that movie because everyone is a lot of the internet is very
positive about this movie.
Very, very positive about The Innkeepers, And I don't know, maybe we were just in a weird mood or something, because I was bored.
I was with my ex, so maybe her negativity was affecting our ability to appreciate the movie.
Yeah, I'm definitely wanting to rewatch it just to see what it is that I missed the first time, because yeah, I had a hard time with that movie the first time we watched it.
So
and then he also did the what's the other movie? It's a sequel to the Eli Roth one where everyone has like crazy
the cabin
fever. Yeah, he did Cabin Fever too. But I think he has like disavowed that movie. He's like, yeah, I made it, but let's not talk about that. Let's just forget that I made that movie.
Which is a good choice on his part. Well, Cabin Fever, don't get me started on that movie.
Yeah, and he didn't make Cabin Fever. He made Cabin Fever 2.
I know. That whole series is just, I don't know. Not my favorite.
Yeah.
Let's move into our crowns and screams.
Well, can I tell a fun fact about the movie?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I will never turn a fun fact down.
So, part of the promotional release for this movie, when it came out on DVD and Blu-ray, is that it was also available on VHS in a clamshell box, just because it was such a...
That is so cool!
Yeah, they really wanted to nail down the authenticity of that era by making it available in that format as well. And I guess the last movie that had come out in VHS had been 4 years before, I think it was A History of Violence. And so it was the first one in several years to have that, and it was kind of unheard of. I don't think it sold that many, but it was kind of a fun collector's item. So
it is now my mission in life, though, to find it on VHS.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That would be so cool. All right, let's move into crowns and screams.
Yes.
For me, I give it a 7 on the screams. It's solid, it's good, but again, a lot of the horror is very subtle, which is not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But really, the best horror in this movie, the best scares are at that pivot point where the friend dies, and then the last 15 minutes of the movie. So that's why I gave it a 7, kind of above average, but not like Hereditary, where I was terrified the entire movie. And again, we talked about Hereditary, so,
Yeah, we could. I kept myself from comparing it to Hereditary more, so we're making progress.
We're getting there. We're not perfect, but we're getting there.
Yes. I'm also giving it a 7 for the same reasons.
As far as crowns go, it's pretty darn perfect. I'm going to give it a good 9 and not a 10 for the reasons I explained, just because I don't know. I feel like you should give less amount of 10s out there in the world. And this movie came very close, but just wasn't quite there for me.
Yeah. I'm going to give it a 9 as well. It lacked that je ne sais quoi of whatever it is that takes something to a 10, but it was almost flawless.
I've never heard you use the word je ne sais quoi, and I need that recorded and on loop for me, please.
Okay. I will send you a looped version of just me saying je ne sais quoi over and over again.
But yeah, it was so good, it was so great, but there was a little bit of zhuzh that was missing, and I don't know if I could label that zhuzh right now. I'd have to, pray about it or something.
Yeah. Man, I just really like this movie. I want to see the main actress from this in more stuff.
Totally.
Basically, the only thing I think I've seen her in otherwise is an Aflac commercial.
Oh.
And it was funny because I saw this Aflac commercial and I was like, is that the girl from House of the Devil?
That is quite the plot twist for her, from being a human sacrifice and mothering the Antichrist to Aflac.
Yeah. I mean, it looks like she's been in stuff, but yeah, it looks like it's mostly been kind of smaller roles. She's going to be in Dr. Sleep, though, so I am very excited for that movie in general, and that makes me even more excited.
All right, should we discuss one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the Satanic Panic?
Yeah, I mean, we figured it would be appropriate, considering the subject matter of the movie, being largely inspired by the Satanic Panic.
I feel like you need to add alarms going off anytime we say Satanic Panic.
Whatever. I'll see what I can do in editing.
Perfect. All right, Nathaniel, hit us up. Give us some... What is the Satanic Panic? What's going on?
So the Satanic Panic was kind of a cultural phenomenon that was mostly through the 1980s that was basically everybody in America being terrified that Satanists were going to come and murder them in some sort of cult ritual or...
Eat their babies.
Yeah, eat their babies, murder their kids.
Hide your kids, hide your wives.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically, Satanists are going to come and mess up your whole life. And they might do it in a way that will make you forget all of it.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. This is such paranoia at its finest.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a great example of kind of how viral fear works. So it really all started kind of around 1980 with a book called Michelle Remembers. So this was a book by a dude named Lawrence Pasder. I'm assuming I'm saying his name correctly, hopefully. But anyways, it is a book that was about this girl who was seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist, one of the two, and basically, through like hypnotherapy and some other things along those lines, she uncovered these deep repressed memories that she had been, tortured and, abused by this cult over all of these years in her childhood. And it was something that she didn't remember, but it was messing her up, in her adulthood, even though she had no memory of it. And so this has, been largely debunked since then. It was, mostly just a sensational book to make lots of money, and, it sold a gazillion copies because everyone was terrified. But that's kind of what kicked things off. And then shortly after that time, there was some abuse of some children at a preschool, and it was mostly sexual abuse. And because Satanism was on everyone's mind, a lot of the assumptions that kind of came from that was that, this must be, ritualistic stuff to abuse these, small children, being done by a satanic cult. That must be the cause for it. And so those two things really launched this fear of satanic ritual abuse into the public sphere.
It's really important to remember, too, that really from the 60s all the way through the mid-90s, there were a ton of occults that were starting to formulate throughout the world. I've got a list of just kind of a massive cult that happened decade by decade. In the 1960s is when we get the Manson family coming out of the woodwork, and if you don't know who the Manson family is, you really need to stop listening to the podcast and go do some research. But then in the 70s, you have the People's Temple, which is the Jonestown Massacre, where people say drink the Kool-Aid. That came from this.
Which was also the inspiration for the movie The Sacrament by Ty West.
It's a horrible and tragic story. In the 1980s, you get the Unification Church, which is also called the Moonies. There's also the Branch Davidians in the 1990s with the Waco raid. And then Heaven's Gate in the 90s. It's this massive cult after cult after cult on top of all of the satanic panic that's going on. And then you have big central figures like Aleister Crowley, who I love to death. He was a psychopath. He died in 1947. And he created this religion known as Thelema, which their mantra or motto is "do what thou wilt." It was a very self-driven religion. There are no morals. Morals are defined by yourself.
Hedonism.
Exactly. Hedonism to a T. And that was very, very terrifying for a lot of religions. And a lot of that occult background started to surge in America in the 50s and the 60s. And then you get Anton LaVey, who was the founder of the actual Church of Satan in California. And Anton, again, he's a very charismatic guy. He looks really scary. He did really well in the circus. He traveled ping-ponged back and forth through a lot of circuses, and so he got to know a lot of celebrities. He got to know a lot of rich and famous people, and he also got to know a lot of the people who are outcasts, who needed a home, who didn't fit into, white Christian society at the time. And so the Church of Satan was founded in the 60s, and it was kind of this perfect storm, this perfect combination to really mess with America. And there's a ton of kickback from religious institutions on this. A ton of kickback. I mean, my dad tells me stories of his mother making him throw out all of his AC/DC vinyls because the church at the time was telling him that if you play it backwards, you're going to have satanic chants and rituals that are going to come through on the vinyl. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah. So it immediately caught a lot of media attention, and also really got kind of blasted into the stratosphere through a lot of religious groups. It became a regular part of a lot of sermons, or like they would have special weekday meetings or whatever. A special meeting talking about, okay, like you have to watch out for the Satanists. Here are all the signs. Oh, they're going to be listening to rock or metal music. They're going to be playing with Ouija boards. They're going to be interested in the occult. They're going to, even as far as stuff like playing cards, a lot of times had a big kickback. I know my dad has mentioned that my grandma, even to this day, really doesn't like face cards because they're evil.
Same with my grandparents.
Mm-hmm. And so it was this huge thing. And, of course, around this time, even things like Dungeons and Dragons is becoming popular. And a group was formed called Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons that was a parent group to keep your kids from joining, the occult through playing Dungeons and Dragons, which is ridiculous. and has resulted in some really funny parodies like the Dead Alewives Dungeons and Dragons skit. But it's still, just... It shows how extreme it went. Kids are playing a fantasy game, playing as elves and dwarves and stuff, and suddenly, they must be being drawn into to Satan through this game.
But, it all reminds me of our Ouija board episode that we had, that this panic that occurred in the United States did happen to a lot of the adults in our lives. And now you still feel the reverberations from all of this.
Oh, yeah.
Ouija boards are terrifying. Tarot card is evil. Don't look into the occult, or Satan will take you over, and demons can be summoned by doing certain things. Like, it blows my mind how sensationalized things became, and it's a real tragedy for those of us who love the occult because it stigmatizes us quite substantially.
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting to see kind of like how it even spread. It started out with the U.S., but because it became such a huge cultural phenomenon, suddenly started being, claims about Satan or satanic abuse, popping up all over the globe. Suddenly, there's stuff in Australia and France and wherever, suddenly the entire world was just riddled with fear about the Satanists are going to come. They're going to do some ritual to you. You're going to be brainwashed. You'll forget that it happened, but it's going to mess you up and make you do evil things your whole life. Thankfully, probably by about 1987, a lot of this started calming down a lot. And at least in terms of the media, the coverage started kind of being a lot more skeptical about a lot of the claims that were being made. And so probably by like the mid-90s, most of the panic had gone away from the public limelight. I mean, obviously, like we mentioned, there's still reverberations of that today, but a lot of the kind of imminent fear, especially about, stuff like Dungeons and Dragons and about music and about all of that, really got toned down to a much more reasonable level.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's still out there. The poor Church of Satan, I just can't believe how they handle all of this. but they got a ton of flack. And if you really look into the dogma and the doctrine of the Church of Satan, it's not anything near this kind of fear and paranoia that was so pervasive. It's dark, it's twisted, but that's only because it's twisting this kind of Judeo-Christian belief that we believe is so pure and so truthful. It's just another way of thinking. It's not harming anybody, the actual practitioner. There's off branches and crazy people out there, of course, but that's going to hold true for any religion.
Yeah, and I think it's important to make the distinction that there's probably a difference between demon worship and then the Church of Satan, which is mostly
it's an atheistic religion, honestly, which is kind of a paradox. But also even demon worship. Like, demon worship can be broken down into just paganism. Like, it's... everything has to be taken with a grain of salt. And when you don't do that, we get things like the Satanic Panic. Yeah,
and it's so interesting to see like how it is still kind of manifesting today. When I was doing some research on this, I was finding some information that, like, for example, in Salt Lake City, so not too far from us, in 2008, there was a therapist named Barbara Snow who was put on probation because she was trying to plant false memories of satanic abuse in her patients. She saw what had happened before with the Satanic Panic and was trying to kind of use that to her advantage. I guess I don't know. That's pretty messed up. And I mean, a lot of people still hold on to the belief of Satanic Panic in a way that is, saying, hey, there's a lot of government cover up of this kind of stuff. There's high ranking government officials that are Satanists and things like that. And so kind of, it's the confirmation bias where a lack of evidence is just evidence for them. The fact that there isn't more evidence of it means that obviously it's just getting covered up by the right people.
Well, and confirmation bias is such a huge problem, especially in faith kind of ideologies. Is, if you like something and you read about it, of course your brain is going to kind of latch onto it and be attracted to it. And if there's something contradictory to that, again, confirmation bias is going to pull you in and make you believe it a little bit more. Mm-hmm. One of the most challenging things to do is look at data, look at a source, and interpret it without any sort of confirmation bias. It's near impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how there are still things that are, actively happening today that are almost the same kind of stuff. For example, there was the Pizzagate conspiracy theory. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not. No, enlighten me.
Oh, good heaven!
I will try and keep my confirmation bias under control.
Okay, so I don't know the details super intimately, just because the whole thing feels like it's giving me an aneurysm. But basically, it was an extreme right-wing group of conspiracy theorists online who began to believe that many high-ranking Democratic officials were operating a child sex ring through a specific pizza shop in D.C.
Sounds about right.
But it reached the point in which one of the conspiracy theorists went into the pizza place armed heavily and held people hostage, demanding to find out where the back room is, where the children are being held. And yeah, it resulted in a big showdown with the police. There was no evidence of it, but they were looking at every random, social media post of every, big Democratic official, the Clintons, for example, and looking at it and saying, oh, this typo here isn't a typo. It's a clue showing, this, it's giving instructions and all of that. And they had it so broken down, to such minutia that they really believed it. But yeah, I mean, you see a lot of the same elements. There's, the belief in a governmental cover-up and high-ranking officials being involved. You see a belief of alleged child abuse. You see these, kind of codes that go with it. These secret clues. And it's fascinating because it's just a modern-day resurgence of the same kind of stuff.
That's insane. I don't even know what to think about that.
Yeah,
people
really
are crazy, and taboo stuff will always be taboo, and no matter how open of a mind you are to it, that confirmation bias is gonna creep in some way or another, and it's just really hard for humans to stay open and logical sometimes. Alrighty, that was a pretty solid episode for us, Nathaniel.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this discussion. I think, especially just kind of going forward, the Satanic Panic era is a really interesting topic of discussion. I'm really looking forward to the upcoming film Satanic Panic, which was written by a friend of the show, Grady Hendrix.
Woo!
And you can definitely see, why he would have chosen that topic, looking at a lot of the elements of, say, My Best Friend's Exorcism, kind of reflecting a lot of that mindset of the era. But yeah, so that's going to be a movie, I think, coming out either this year or next year. I don't know, it comes up a lot, and so I think it's a really fascinating subject.
It's fun, it's spooky, and again, there's a lot of taboo and mystery about it, and horror movies are all about that.
All right, so any final thoughts about the movie or about Satanic Panic or anything else?
Just to tell our listeners to get excited, Nathaniel and I are going to be performing some magic for our anticipation of a future episode.
Yep, gonna do a spell. We have lots of cool stuff lined up. We're gonna have some real life ghost stories. We're gonna have all sorts of cool stuff. We have some really cool people lined up as guests. We, once again, I want to mention our merchandise that is now available on TeePublic. So definitely check that out. I'm going to make a few more designs that should be available soon. Everything's coming up, Scream Kings.
All right, friends, stay spooky.
Stay spooky.
Need even more Scream Kings? Here's our obligatory shameless social media plug. Follow us on Twitter or Instagram at ScreamKingsPod. You could also email us at screamkingspodcast@gmail.com. Help us reach a wider audience of horror fans by leaving a review on iTunes or by sharing a link on social media. You can also support the show by going to patreon.com/ScreamKings. Stay spooky.